Okay, it's my first time. Hello, good evening. I'm Maria Guitar, the Spanish editor for Paula Hawkins. On behalf of Planeta Publishing Company, I would like to thank you for being with us today. Espacio Telefónica too, for welcoming us in this spectacular hall. It is a luxury to be here for the presentation of the Blue Hour. We have Marina Sanmartín with us. She's a writer, publisher, bookseller, and we also have Paula Hawkins. She always leaves space for the Spanish readers. I'll leave you with them as soon as I can, because you've come here to hear from Paula. But let me just give you some context in today's presentation. Paula Hawkins became well known with The Girl on the Train. It was a best-selling novel. It was made into a movie, and then came A Slow Fire Burning, On Into the Water, A Slow Fire Burning, and Blind Spots. It's been 10 years since she wrote The Girl on the Train. We have over 29 million readers in the world, and Paula has become one of the main names in today's genre, and she has specific characteristics that you will again find in this novel. Very much following Patricia Highsmith's, Alfred Hitchcock's styles in this universe of this domestic suspense or domestic thriller, where a neighbor can become a problem. Appearance is important. In this case, this novel brings us to the world of art, and everything begins with the gruesome finding when they find out that one bone in one of the most famous sculptures of one big artist is a human bone. It's not no animal bone, as was thought. So this is the beginning of the Blue Hour. I won't tell you any more about the novel because I don't want to spoil your reading. So without further ado, I leave you with Paula and Marina. I hope you will enjoy the presentation. At the end of it, there will be a Q&A, and Paula will be available for signing books. Thanks very much. Good evening. When I was on my way here, I was wondering what we would be doing here today, because there's so many terrible things happening in Spain these days. There is such a big amount of horrible, terrible things happening in the world. It is difficult to justify how we can move away from literature, from reading, from the literary conversation. It is indeed a mistake, because the reality is just the opposite. Reading helps us understand the world better and helps us be alert. My second doubt was that, well, this may be true, but to what extent does mystery novels, the thriller genre, to what extent does that match the situation, and more specifically Paula Hawkins' novels? To me, the good criminal fiction is that genre, that novel, that is much more the narration. This is what the Blue Hour is, really. Maria was telling us about the plot. It was the history, the story of a multidisciplinary artist, Vanessa Chapman. When one of her works is exhibited, it is found out that one of the bones in one sculpture is an animal bone, and this brings all the characters to the Edis Island, an island which is not accessible for one part of the day because of the tides, and this is where Vanessa Chapman had spent her last years. And from this point, we can begin a discussion with Paula. Can I ask you, to what extent choosing this stage was the first stone of all this story in the Blue Hour?
The choice of the island was that was where the novel started for me, was with this tidal island off the coast of Scotland, a place that you can get to only when the tide is low. So I was kind of inspired by a place I saw in France, actually. I was there on holiday on the coast of Brittany. I was walking and I saw a tiny little island that had just one house on it. And I just loved that idea I was sort of enthralled by the idea of living somewhere like that, of the kind of person who would choose to go and live in a place where twice a day you're completely cut off and no one can get there and you can't get out. What would make you want to go and live there? So that's where it kind of started for me. And then it came to me that actually that would be a wonderful place for an artist to live and work, for somebody who would be drawn there by the landscape, by the beauty of the place, but also by the isolation of it, the freedom to work undisturbed, untroubled by anyone. So I started thinking about why someone might go there, and I had this, the island kind of shaped the character of Vanessa, that I knew she had to be someone who was trying to escape something, who was trying to run away from something, but who was also running towards something, running towards an idea of what she needed to do in order to create great art.
In this case, I don't know if you agree with it or not, I believe that the island is in fact Vanessa Chapman. It is a reflection, it is a mirror. It has this attractive side of isolation, and at the same time also this terrible thing that has to do with loneliness. Could you explain a little bit about who Vanessa Chapman is and how she is shaped? She gets shaped because this is not just the narration, it is the building of a full pictorial construction that you are making up.
She is shaped by the place in which she lives over the years that she lives there. So she's this person who craves solitude, who craves freedom, but the whole way through the book there's this tension between the need to be alone, to be free, to live and work as you want, and the need to be part of a community, the need to be surrounded by people, the need to get inspiration from people, and that's the kind of push and pull that goes through the novel. But I also sort of spent time thinking about what it would be like to live somewhere very isolated, and what it might do to your mind after a while, that it may alter the way you see people, because so much of the way we see people is influenced by other people around us. We learn what we think about other people because we have other people's reactions too. So if you have nobody around you, no sounding board, no one to bounce ideas off, what would that mean for you? And how would that change the kind of person that you are? So her solitude shifts and it becomes loneliness, which is an altogether sadder kind of state.
That loneliness soon stops existing because grace appears, but I'm interested in how Vanessa Chapman holds a dialogue with her work. We could perhaps stop in this creative process of Paula Hawkins when she creates a pictorial work that does not exist, because all of Vanessa Chapman's works are very consistent. So how is this managed?
Can you say again? Sorry, I'm gonna asking the translator.
No problem.
So, how were Vanessa Chapman's sculptures created? What was the inspiration? Because there's lots of titles, lots of canvases, and in fact, they were also her works.
The creation of the actual artworks. So I did a lot of research. I did a lot of reading about artists, about the lives of artists. I read a biography of the British sculptor Barbara Hepworth, for example. I read a memoir of Celia Paul, and I thought a lot about the kind of work I wanted her to create. And I was inspired by a Scottish painter called Joan Erdley. And so when I'm describing the landscapes and the seascapes, I'm thinking of a particular artist. artist, and that is Joan Erdley, and the way she created her work, and the way, but I was also imagining the restrictions that Vanessa would have on her work and in her life. At one point she breaks her wrist, and so she can't paint anymore, so it changes the way she paints. She starts to paint with her hand, and there were all those really interesting things that I had to think about while I was writing the novel, is how a visual artist work, and the physical restrictions there are on a visual artist, because writers don't have any of that. You just sit there like this and tap away, but a visual artist is constrained by the physical, by the weather, by the wind, all sorts of things, and so that was one of the really enjoyable things about writing the novel, was creating these artworks and imagining them fully, and picturing them in my head, though I'm fully aware that probably when people read the novel they'll be imagining something completely different.
Está tremendamente logrado.
This is really successful, and it helps us tackle the next question. To what extent is contemporary art one of the main topics of the novel? I like the approach because it is also useful for deepening into one of the big topics of your literature, which is women in the world. By reading The Blue Hour, I was thinking about the amazing world of Celie Husper. This is an interesting gaze that is shared about the role of women in art throughout history. Through Vanessa Chapman's words, you say that until very recently, women were equivalent to the work. They were looked at by men, but very rarely was it them that were actually onlookers and creators of the work. So to what extent does this unfair division of role affect us in the future still?
I think things have improved somewhat, but it's certainly true that until quite recently, women's contribution to art was not valued very much. It was very rare to see a solo exhibition by a woman at a big gallery in London or New York. In fact, I think there was a protest once where the kind of line was, does a woman have to be naked to get into the National Gallery? And the point was that there are lots of pictures of naked women, but you can't get your work in there unless you've taken your clothes off. But I think that has changed over the last, quite recently actually, 20 years. I think we are seeing far more women and women's work being exhibited. The Biennale a couple of years ago was dominated by female artists, but it's taken us a long time to get there. And Vanessa, at the time she's working, this is in the 1990s, and she feels that she's overlooked, and she feels worse than that, is that when critics are looking at her work, they're looking at her more than they're looking at the art. They're looking at what she looks like, and they're looking at her, they're criticizing her behavior, they're calling her difficult and demanding, or whatever it is people say about women who know their own minds. But they don't actually just look at the work the way they might look at the work of a man. And so that was a big question in the book, is about who gets to look and who is looked at, and who gets to tell stories and who does the interpretation. And that's something that I return to over and over.
Sí, y es muy curioso.
It is curious, but it is true that Vanessa Chapman, at some points in the novel, she says, I am the one who looks. But the novel is a lot of character. It tries to see who Vanessa Chapman really is, and for this purpose you do not only use one point of view, but you use lots of registers. First person in the diary, Vanessa, or the voices of Jane Baker or Grace Haswell. How do you decide to position yourself in one viewpoint or another? Why is only one voice not enough?
I find it very difficult to tell a story in a straightforward way. I always want to look from lots of different angles, and part of it was that, so Vanessa is the main figure in the book, but she's dead when the book opens. That's not a spoiler, but we know this. She's already gone. So you can't see her in the flesh. We get to hear her voice through her letters, through her diaries and that kind of thing. But I wanted the reader to be able to see her from lots of different angles, from this curator called James Becker, who's kind of obsessed with her work, who's an expert on her work, and from this woman called Grace, who's her friend and companion and who cares for her at the end of her life. And we also see how the critics saw her, how other members of her extended family saw her, but it's sort of the reader then gets to decide who they believe, who Vanessa really is. Was she really that difficult? Was she really selfish? Was she just actually following her own dream? I wanted the reader to be able to see her from lots of different angles in that way.
You mentioned Grace, who is this doctor who spends the last years of Vanessa's years sharing this house on the Aries Island. I believe this is the character vertebrating one other essential topic in the novel, friendship. It sounds simple as a topic, but that's far from being true. In fact, it was to me one of the most interesting things of the story. The reflection you make about friendship in two ways. On the one hand, I would like to ask if you understand we underestimate this type of relationship. On the other hand, I would like to ask you if we sometimes sweeten friendship, taking into account how friendship can become quite toxic at times.
True, and I think that's something I was trying to get at when I was writing the book, is that when we write about marriages and love affairs and family relationships in all sorts of ways, and we appreciate how complicated they can be and how they change over time. But friendship is often just written about as something simple. It's just a simple relationship, and I don't think that's true. And so that's why in this novel we see a friendship that starts when Vanessa falls and breaks her arm, and she goes to be treated by this doctor, and the doctor looks after her, and there's a position of trust and a position of dependence, and they like each other, and they start a friendship there, and then that friendship changes over 20 years. Sometimes one is dependent on the other, sometimes one wants to be with the other one more than the other person, and it is the power dynamics are shifting all the time throughout this friendship. It's not a simple friendship at all. It is very complicated. It's at times not a friendship. They're enemies. Frenemies, I think is what people call them these days. But it was something that I wanted to look at. I wanted to look at the complexity of it. I think also there is this idea that friendship is less important than other relationships, that our relationships with our lovers are more important, or our husbands, wives, whatever. And to some degree that's obvious why that is true. But when you think about it, some of the longest relationships we will have in our lives will be friendships. The longest relationship I've had in my life was, apart from with my direct family, is with a friend who I met when I was a small child, and we're still friends. That's many, many years. I've never had a relationship with a man that's lasted anything like that. So it's still, sometimes those relationships can be very important, and I don't think we do, as a society, place the same kind of emphasis and importance on friendship. It's just, she's just a friend. It's like it doesn't matter, and I think it does.
Sí, de hecho.
Yes, in fact, Vanessa Chapman had a husband. It's her ex-husband, and it is quite an important character, because when the bone is discovered, it is found out that Julian disappeared in the past, and he was never found again. They never knew what happened to him. But I agree with you in that we seem to understand that access to corporal or sexual privacy makes us know the other person better.
Again, I think I might have missed a word there. Can you repeat?
We seem to believe that sometimes when it's not a friendship relationship, it is a relationship with a partner. There seems to be something that brings both together, and it is the body access, the access to the body privacy of the other person. And this seems to make us feel that we know better, that we know the other person better.
Is the most important thing. Yeah, and I think that is obviously true. You know somebody in a different way if you have had sex with them, frankly. But I think there are also other ways of knowing somebody physically, and so Grace, for example, is Vanessa's carer when she has cancer and she's dying at the end, at the end of her life. So that would be another whole kind of physical intimacy that you would have to develop if you care for somebody in that way. So I think again that there are lots of ways of knowing somebody, and to place the primacy on one over the other is sometimes to miss what is important about what makes us human and what makes us complex and interesting.
En cualquier caso, lo que vamos a...
In any case, in the Blue Hour, we find out that nothing is as it seems to be. Could you explain what's the origin, the inspiration of this title? So what does the Blue Hour mean?
So the Blue Hour is the time of day when the sun has set, but there's still light in the sky. There's still that quite beautiful blue light, and it's a time when kind of energy shifts and animals start to move around and predators start to come out. But it's also a time when it's really easy to mistake one thing for another. It's easy to see a shadow and think it's a person, or see something move and think it's something else. And that's a big theme in the novel, is the misperception of what's in front of you, of kind of not seeing the wood for the trees, for being mistaken by what appears in front of you for lots of different reasons. Maybe you're distracted, maybe you're grieving, what have you, but you don't fully recognize what is in front of you.
Exactly.
Yes, exactly. In fact, I think there is another very brilliant point in the novel. When you begin to read it, you will clearly identify the mystery in the plot. But little by little, as you move forward in the reading, and this is what shows that the writer is a very good writer, you will start feeling that there is another mystery underneath the main plot. We won't reveal it, of course, but I do believe that we can maybe say a little thing about it by mentioning the references, the reference points and names that inspired you to write The Blue Hours. I was thinking about Rebecca, this invisible character like Vanessa Chapman, but there is also a magnificent moving named The Wicker Man. What were your main points of reference when you started this story?
So I was thinking quite a lot about Daphne du Maurier, who wrote Rebecca, and there are some sort of obvious parallels with this novel, and one is that there's this woman who sort of looms large over the whole book but isn't actually in it. So in Rebecca it is Rebecca, in this book it's Vanessa. There's also a complicated relationship in Rebecca between her and Mrs. Danvers, and in this novel it's between Vanessa and Grace. But I had read some of du Maurier's short stories just before I started writing, and I was thinking about those too, about the birds and about Don't Look Now, where there's a very sinister feeling of threat that runs all the way through, and you're not really sure where the threat is coming from. There's a particular atmosphere of fear that kind of pervades those stories, which I wanted to create in this book. And The Wicker Man, which is mentioned in the book, is, people might be too young to remember it, but I don't know how young everyone is. But it's a story that has this. It takes place in a strange English village, and it has this this idea that something is threatening, but you're not sure what that threatening thing is, and people are distracted. They're looking in this direction where they should be looking in that direction. So there were lots of those that was what I was aiming for when I was trying to build the atmosphere of the story, is that you need to be very aware because there's threat all around you.
Y de hecho, retomando...
In fact, going back on The Wicker Man, we have Vanessa and Grace, clearly the two pillars of the story, but inevitably there is a third character looking at them as we are looking at them, James Baker. What could you tell us about Baker? What is the origin of this character? A man, quite a naive man that tries to start to have play a role in Vanessa Chapman's life.
Yeah, so Becker is the curator of the foundation that owns Vanessa's work. So he is the person who is tasked with sorting out this problem about the human bone. He has to go and find out where did this bone come from, or try and find out what were the circumstances in which she made the sculpture, did she know what she was putting in there, all that kind of stuff. So off he goes. He's quite young, and he's always loved Vanessa's work, and he has kind of a personal connection to it for complicated reasons that I won't go into now, but he thinks of himself as the sort of foremost expert in the world on Vanessa Chapman. He believes he should be the person who tells her story to the world. He comes from a working class background, and he's working at a this very posh foundation where he's surrounded by aristocrats, and so he kind of constantly feels a bit out of place, but he also feels a little bit superior to them all because he's at least worked to get where he got. He didn't just have it all handed to him, he's studied, he's worked hard, so he has this kind of complicated relationship with the people he works for. There's a complicated love triangle going on with him and his wife and somebody else, and then this is the backdrop. He has to go out to Eris, and he has to meet Grace. He has to try to charm Grace, who is not a very charmable woman, and to try and form a kind of alliance with her and figure out what is going on. And as you say, he does appear a little bit naive sometimes. He's quite open. He doesn't, again, he's one of those people who's maybe looking this way when he should be looking that way. He's worrying so much about what's going on with his pregnant wife that he's maybe not seeing what is there in front of him.
Yo creo que son.
I think it's these three perspectives, Grace's, Vanessa's, and Baker's, that force the reader be always attentive to the story. They make you want to read more and more. But moving from the Blue Hour to the work of a writer, an author like you, what has this novel meant? It is very commercial, but it is probably also the most literary of your novels. What is it to you? How did you come to this novel? How did you get out of it? What changed in you?
I think I loved writing this novel, and I think it's the novel definitely that I've enjoyed writing more than any of the others, and I think it's the novel I've kind of been moving towards over the past few books. So it is, yes, I think I'm very happy that you think it's more literary. I think that is the direction I've been moving in, while wanting to retain all of the suspense and the kind of page-turningness that the girl on the train had. You want to retain that, but you also want to elevate your writing and write about things that are important or important to me, and the role of art in somebody's life, or the role of work, and creative work in somebody's life. It's very important to me. So that was something I was thinking about. I was also thinking, I had been thinking a lot about this idea of escape, about wanting to get away from all not just the pressure of the world, but all the noise of the world. I know it is also possible to just turn off your phone, but sometimes it feels like you want to physically run. And so I think I was kind of exploring that idea of the fantasy of bolting and running away to an island and not talking to anyone for a very long time. So those were all the things that went into that book, and it was just such a joy to be immersed in the world of art and the world of creation, and on my imaginary island.
Antes decía María.
Before, Maria was saying, when she was introducing you, that you have sold 29 million volumes around the world. There are countries that have less population, a lower number of population than you have sold books. We tend to think that literature, whether it is crime literature or commercial literature, it's sort of unseen, and it's not part of this sort of big literature. But I believe that you are a very powerful woman, because you write something that can actually reach 29 million people. Doesn't that give you a sense of vertigo, maybe?
Y 29 millones de personas lo escuchan.
You say something and 29 million people are paying attention to it?
I don't think 29 million people are paying attention anymore. I think there was a moment, but then you're not aware of it before. You know, when I wrote The Girl on the Train, I had no idea if anyone would read it or not, and then suddenly a lot of people did. And now, I am aware of that what I write will probably be read and will be reviewed, and people will be looking to see what I've done, and that is, I mean, it's a privilege. I should be very happy, but it can feel quite daunting. But it's also, I think you have to be very conscious of the fact that people will read what you're going to write, and so that I think that puts greater responsibility on you to think about the stories that you tell and to think about how to get it right.
Does that prevent you or scare you a little bit when you're going to write, or when you sit in front of the white page, the blank page, you forget about somebody is going to read this? I
don't think you ever forget about it completely, but you have to try to put that out of your mind, because if you were thinking all the time about who's going to read it and what they're going to think about this and how they're going to interpret that, you would just never write anything. It would be impossible. It would be paralyzing. So I think, although it's there kind of in the back of my mind, I have to try and put it aside. I think what I usually do is think, well, maybe I'll change it all later anyway. You know, I'll write this now and I might just tear it up later. And that way you can make yourself right.
I'm going to ask you one last question, and if you don't mind, later we're going to open the Q&A so that the audience can ask you questions. And I will go back to The Blue Hour, the novel that we are discussing. We're going to read a fragment of it, and I'm going to ask two questions, a little fragment that are the thoughts of Vanessa Chapman. But before I read them, I would like to ask you, to what extent are you Vanessa Chapman to yourself?
I mean, there are things that she says and does that I agree with and that I sympathize with, and that urge to run away, for example, some of her frustrations about the way she's written about, for example, I've felt that at times in my life. But I'm also quite different to her. I don't think I'm as single-minded as she is. Maybe I would like to be as single-minded as she is. I would like to have the courage to just be by myself and never, live in that way. But I'm not like that. I like to have people around me. So there are parts of her that I admire. There are parts of her I don't admire so much. But I always like a single-minded woman, and I would like, there are lots of things about her that I would like to be like, even though I'm probably not.
De hecho, lo que quería.
In fact, what I wanted to read to you is the definition that Vanessa Chapman does of art, because I think that that's one of the best fragments of the novel. The art is a legacy, it calms you, it excites you, it consoles you. It's what you do all day long. It's the way we solve things, is the way I understand the world, is the opportunity of starting again, of changing your skin, of really take a revenge, of falling in love, of being good, of enjoying a long life. This is what art means to Vanessa Chapman. What is literature for you?
I mean, I think I agree with her on lots of those things, that it's when I write, that is the way I try to figure things out. That is the way I try to understand the world. It's sometimes a distraction of the world. It consoles me. It's the thing that saved my life a couple of times, because when I've been desperate and in despair, I can throw myself into work, and I don't have to think about how terrible everything is. So for me, I don't think necessarily that my books will be read in 300 years, but I do. But the other parts of it, so the legacy part maybe not so much, but the other parts of it are definitely things that I think about work, about creative work, and I think it's a great privilege to do something that absorbs you and helps you and soothes you as much as writing does me.
Yo creo que algunos.
I believe that some of them will be read in 300 years, because out of those 29 million books, well, some of them will have survived and will be by next to somebody's bed. You are a full-time writer, aren't you? You cannot leave it aside. Are you thinking about it all the time? Are you continuously thinking about your next story, or can you really isolate that?
I mean, I haven't really started writing it, but I'm always that's always in the back of my mind what I want to write about next, who I want to write about next, what kind of people they are and where they are and how they relate to each other. So I'm not very good at leaving it behind. It's always sort of there, here somewhere at the back of my mind. Yeah.
Pues lo esperaré.
Well, we're looking forward to your next idea, your next book. Does somebody want to have ask a question from the audience?
Hi, Paula.
Hi.
My name's Anne, and I want to mention the writing process to you. I interviewed Val McDermid, the crime writer, who said that it was important to sit down at her desk at 9 o'clock in the morning and get something on the page, and to treat writing as a day job, and then later to sprinkle the stardust on it. I just was interested in knowing what your writing process is like.
I think I would agree with Val quite a lot, actually, that it's a job. It's what I do. So I sit down in the morning and I write, and I don't have that thing where I have to wait for the muse to come to me. It's not like that. I'm quite practical. I sit down and I work, and then the joy for me is, she might call it sprinkling stardust, is going back and refining the language and making sure that everything sounds right and that it reads well and that the reader is going to be surprised. And so I am the same in that I'll just sit down and work at my desk. It's a job that I do. It isn't some mysterious thing.
Hola, buenas.
Hello, good afternoon. Hi. I always ask this because I'm very curious about it. For instance, in writers like you, but I also feel the same about chefs or musicians. We are at a time where I suppose that you read a lot. You're an avid reader. Do you read with the same curiosity that I have when I'm expecting the final twist? Or do you read it knowing what's going to happen, like a chef, when they know they're tasting somebody else's work and they know what the ingredients are? Are you ahead of a normal reader? I don't know if I've explained myself well.
I don't think I'm ahead of the normal reader. I think if you read a lot of crime or of these kinds of novels, you maybe sometimes learn to spot things. You learn some of the tricks that people will play. But to be honest, a lot of the time, particularly when I'm writing, I'm not reading crime novels. I'll try and read completely different novels, or I'll read non-fiction or something like that, because I don't want to have too many other plots in my head when I'm trying to put together my own. So I do read all the time, and most of the time I do just read for pleasure. I'm not reading it as a writer and kind of analysing it. Sometimes if I think something is completely brilliant, I'll go back and I'll try and analyse, like, how did they do that? What is it that makes it work so well? What is it that makes it so clever? But most of the time I think I read like a normal person.
Hola.
Hello. Congratulations on your work. I was wondering, what did you feel when the girl on the train was chosen to be turned into a movie? And if you're happy with the results after your work?
Yeah, I liked the movie. I had nothing to do with the making of it, so the rights were sold very early on. I didn't write the script. I didn't have anything to do with it. So all I did was I visited the set, I met the actors, I went to the premiere, I did all the fun things and none of the work, which is the right way to do it, I think. And I did like it. I thought I know that it was very controversial that they moved it, the setting from London to the United States, and lots of people didn't like that. But for me, it wasn't the most important thing. I think they stayed really true to like the darkness at the heart of the story, and I thought that a lot of the performances were brilliant. I thought Emily Blunt was great. She really inhabited Rachel, and yeah, I liked it a lot. Thank you.
Hello, Paula. I'm an avid audiobook listener, and I was wondering if you ever have a say with who reads your novels, who narrates your novels. Because, for example, in this case, you have the diary, and you have the different characters, and Gemma did a wonderful job with the audio version, and Rosamund Pike did the same thing with another of your books. But sometimes, if the narrator is not that great, you end up hating the book, and then you have to buy the book and read the book like a normal person. So do you have a say in that, or you leave that to the publishers?
What they do is they tend to come to me and they say, these are the people we're thinking of. So they give me a list, and I would say, oh yes, I like this person, I like this person. But actually, until you've heard them read it, you don't really know how it's going to work. But I know that Gemma Whelan, for example, who did this one, has a great reputation. She's read lots of audiobooks, and I met her and we got on really well, so I was happy with it. But yeah, really, it's one of those things where you've got to trust the publisher to pick the best person. But I know what you mean about if you don't like the person reading the audio, it's just terrible. You can't finish it. You have to, read it.
Vamos a hacer una última pregunta.
We're going to leave the audience ask the last question.
I haven't interviewed anyone, I'm just an enthusiast, so I'm sorry if the question is a little boring, but I think one of the most distinct parts of your book are these really well-written, deep female protagonists, and I've always wondered, like, what goes through your head, what inspires you to write all of these deep, unique characters?
Thank you. I'm really interested in people who don't fit, people who feel like outsiders and who feel that they've been misjudged in some way. So I tend to start with like one small characteristic or one trait that they have, and I mean, like the obvious example is Rachel, and I didn't so much start with her drinking as her memory loss. I thought it was really interesting to write about someone who can't remember something, and then it became her drinking, and then I thought, well, why does she drink? And then, so what I tend to do is I think about a trait, and then I start to ask myself, well, why is this person like this? What led them to this point? So with Grace, you will say, you know, why does she behave like this? Why is she so lonely? And then you go back into her early life, and you find that she had this rejection a perceived rejection by her parents and a rejection by friends, and you start to build up slowly. You start to build up a picture of somebody who isn't a good person or a bad person, but is just a really complicated person who's trying to do their best in difficult circumstances. And those are the people I always find the most intriguing, and those are the people that have so much scope for like conflict and drama in their lives, and that's what you're looking for, obviously, as a novelist, is drama. Maybe not in life, but in art.
Vamos a terminar.
We're going to wrap this conversation now so that Paula has time to sign your books. But before I say goodbye, I would like to leave you the floor, Paula, so that if you had to tell us about your book without having anybody asking you questions, and if you hadn't told anybody what moved you really to write this book, is there anything that you would like to share with us about the time that while you were writing the book?
Oh, that's a really hard question. You can't leave me with that one. I mean, I think what I loved the most of it, well, there's lots of things, but delving into the nature of that obsessive, difficult friendship that kept me going for a long time, and it made me want to read about lots of difficult friendships and lots of difficult women and how they relate to each other. So that was a real joy.
Yo creo que es de lo más interesante de la obra.
I think that is one of the most interesting parts of the Blue Hour, and I'm really looking forward to the people in my environment to read it, because I really want to go through it with them. And thank you so much. It's been a real pleasure to have this conversation with you. Thank you.